Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we welcome Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Thank you for being with us, Tom. We appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to go through just some general housekeeping for those who are on here with us. At the top of your screen, there are some view options. I recommend clicking on who's talking, as that will create a better viewing experience for you during the session. At the bottom of your screen, there's some controls, both for your microphone and your camera. All of our guests have been muted. We'll try to keep it that way. In addition, I ask our guests to turn off their video, as this will help conserve some bandwidth and connectivity during the session. We have had questions pre-submitted for the session. However, if you do have questions during the conversation, feel free to use the chat function. If you go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and you click on the quote bubble, we'll use that. And if we have time during the session, we'll do our best to get to your questions. And also, next Monday is a holiday, so we won't be having this session, but we will have it next Tuesday at 3:30, and we'll really be focusing on the reopening of the economy. We'll have a discussion regarding some of the resources available to help our businesses through that process. We will be using different GoToMeeting resource. We'll be using GoToMeeting webinar next week, so please keep an eye out for the links, because there'll be a different link sent to you for next week's program. But again, thank you all for joining us. And today we welcome New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Tom, again, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Todd, very much. And thanks to all of your colleagues who join us as part of this virtual experience. We're doing many of these kinds of meeting opportunities, and with all the challenges of what we're going through, I guess we're fortunate to live in a time where technology enables us to be in touch in ways that even just a few years ago might not have been possible. So Todd, I want to thank you and the Chautauqua County Chamber for all of your great efforts, as well the Manufacturers Association on the Southern Tier, MASP, two very important organizations that really look out for the interests of the business community, especially our small businesses, our mid-sized businesses. Certainly for all of New York State, the businesses represented in your organizations really provide the backbone of our economy. Very important that we do all that we can to help you survive through these unexpectedly challenging times. I know Chautauqua Chamber has a two-decade history of bringing together what have been more localized chambers, and I'm told that MAST has a 120-year history. That's really quite incredible, and again, a credit to all of you. Tom Carpenter, who's our regional rep for your part of the state and a resident of your community, is on the call as well, and Tom will be listening, and if there's any follow-up to our conversation, he'll certainly be in touch with you, Todd, and with your colleagues. So, let me just say, first of all, to those on the call, I hope you and yours are safe and well. Obviously, we all know people and some in our own families who've been touched by the pandemic, and it really is just an incredible few weeks that we've all been going through, and we should never minimize the importance of the human dimension of this crisis. And a lot of what I'll talk about will be numbers and the economy and revenue trends and so on, but I do think the emphasis, appropriately so, is on public health. If you don't have public health, you're not going to have the recovery of our economy that we are all looking for. And certainly for those of you who are involved with providing vital services through this very challenging time, and those of you who have members of your family who are in healthcare or in government services, thanks to all those everyday heroes who are out there in your communities, and certainly in all the communities across our state that are really helping us navigate through an unexpectedly challenging time in our state's history. So the public health dimension, as I said, is key, but obviously The economic devastation has been real and obviously ongoing. It's why everyone is focused on what reopening means, what it will look like. As you know, the governor has set forth a regional and phased-in approach as far as how we reopen the state and the state's economy, certain metrics having to be met. And the good news that just came out over the past few days is that Western New York has now met the 7 out of 7 requirements. I gather the tracing piece of the testing was the last piece to be put in place, and starting tomorrow, phase 1 of reopening can happen in your region of the state. So that's good news. You know, certainly still a challenging situation downstate, Long Island, New York City, Hudson Valley as well. But your region is now joining the other upstate regions that can now talk about reopening and what that means. Phase 1, as you know, speaks to manufacturing and construction, curbside retail. And as you know, you have these regional control rooms that are set up with local leadership. Kathy Hochul heading up the control room for Western New York. And I know you had the Lieutenant Governor on, I believe, last week, and she certainly knows your region very, very well. So it clearly is going to be a process. And although Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Allegheny have had among some of the lower COVID-19 counts and deaths in the state, obviously we still have to be concerned as we reopen. You know, the obvious concern is we don't want to see a spike and then having to go backwards. So doing it carefully certainly is very, very key. So in terms of the economy, and look, you're business people, or some of you perhaps work in nonprofits or government, so you're on the front lines, you know what's happening in your own community. So you know the big picture is that we went from, you know, the beginning of March to what had been a very strong economy, you know, certainly from a statewide perspective, low unemployment. Certainly when we looked at our pension fund investments, very, very strong. And by the end of March, you know, the earthquake hit with the pandemic, and boy, did things turn around very rapidly. You know, we saw at a national level for the first quarter, the gross domestic product dropped 4.8%, biggest drop since the 2008 crisis. And when you consider that it really was those last 2 weeks in March, the end of that first quarter, that created that negative dynamic, you know, certainly as we are into April and May, this is where you're seeing the really big drops, you know, and as we go through this next quarter, you know, the forecasts are all over the place. GDP drop at 20%, 30, 35, 40%. You know, who knows where we'll end up by the end of June. But certainly we see record numbers of unemployment claims happening nationally. So the disappearance of 20.5 million jobs nationally, wiping out virtually all of the job gains over the past decade. Unemployment rate of 14.7%. You know, that percentage is still less than what was experienced during the Great Depression. But the difference now is that this all happened so rapidly. So it's not just the loss of jobs, it's how fast it all happened, which makes this a very different kind of recession, severe recession, near depression, however you want to label it, than certainly we've experienced. Since mid-March, more than 2 million New Yorkers have applied for unemployment benefits, $7.4 billion paid out in unemployment benefits. In terms of context, for all of 2019, we had a little over 2.1 billion paid out in unemployment benefits, and already where we are right now, 7.4 billion. So again, it just shows the magnitude of what we've been going through. We chart carefully sales tax collections, a very important revenue source for the state and for our localities, especially our county governments that rely on sales tax even more than property taxes. From a business perspective, it's often a sign of consumer confidence and economic activity. You know, so we always do a quarterly reporting. So when we put out the quarterly report, and I said to the staff, I said, what does it really mean? You know, that first quarter is two different stories. You know, it's 2 months and 2 weeks of one story and 2 weeks of another story. So, you know, we showed a net increase of 4.6% actually for the first 3 months of 2020. So it's always good news when we're seeing an increase there. When you drill down on the numbers, though, what it really starts to tell the story. The Metro New York City area, where the pandemic first hit, just in the last 2 weeks of March, went from very strong positive growth to a minus 12% just in those 2 weeks. So, you know, although in Chautauqua County, you had seen, I think it was about an 8.5% increase for the first 3 months. You know, the picture is very, very different now. So unlike our usual pattern, again, to try to, you know, share information to help inform the debate and knowledge base as to what's going out there, we did a monthly and April sales tax report that some of you may have seen. And again, no surprise, it confirms what we had all felt. Sales tax collections dropped in the month of April statewide 24.4%, in Chautauqua County down by 25.9%. And sales tax collections were down in every region of the state. Your neighbors in Cattaraugus County down 23.4%. So we're seeing that at the county sales tax level, the city sales tax level. Again, it's just one indication of the kind of economic devastation. And so when we look at our state budget, the different revenue sources for the state, you know, in terms of business activity, not just sales tax, but the taxes and fees that come out of real estate transactions, the other kinds of revenue streams that we have, you know, no surprise that we're seeing a significant revenue shortfall in the state. As you know, the state budget had to be done by April 1st. It came in, you know, a day or so later than that, but relatively on time. And because of all the uncertainty at the beginning of April, the state budget basically was a placeholder budget, if I can call it that. It had numbers in there on the spending for state agencies and for local assistance and healthcare and so on. But it made clear that if the revenue wasn't going to be coming in, that there would be adjustments to the budget. And so the way that that would be accomplished is that the governor was given extraordinary powers to, in effect, unilaterally adjust spending in the state budget if there were significant revenue shortfalls, with the proviso that the legislature would have 10 days from when the governor would make those adjustments to come up with a different plan if they had a different plan. And so where we are right now with the state budget, and it's important to understand where we're at with state finances, because that's an important underpinning to the foundation of the economy for the state. The shortfall for at this point is projected for the fiscal year to be about $13.3 billion, certainly a bigger shortfall than had been anticipated just a few short months ago. You know, people ask me, are we broke? Do we not have any money? Well, that's not quite the case. We actually ended the fiscal year on March 31st with money in the bank. As of the beginning of this month, we had $8.6 billion in cash on hand, but just from the week before that, we've spent about $533 million of that cash on hand. And one of the big revenue impacts moving through this first quarter of our fiscal year, which is the second quarter of the calendar year, is the delay in income tax filing to July 15th. So that could be as much as $9 billion that had been expected to be revenue to the state that's not going to be there. It'll come later in July, but it won't be there now. And we have big spending commitments in May and June, particularly with regard to school aid payments. So it's a challenging situation. On the plus side, we have started to receive some of the money from Washington, part of the various federal legislation that's been enacted. The Coronavirus Relief Fund allocated about $5.1 billion to the state. We have received that check already. What we are trying to determine now is how much of that will be eligible under the reimbursement formulas that the Treasury Department has given guidance on. The good news is in the updated guidance, I think it's about 2 weeks ago, it appears to be a bit more flexible in terms of what we could get reimbursement for. So at this point, the financial plan only accounts for about $133 million of that money to be spent. So there hopefully will be the opportunity for more of that to help us with our cash flow during this first quarter of the fiscal year. Also from Washington, about $1 billion came for school aid and about $920 million for higher education. So we have started to see some of that relief. As I mentioned, the budget provided extraordinary flexibility for the governor to make adjustments. And there are three triggers within the fiscal year when the governor, through the Division of Budget, will come up with a plan to keep our state budget in balance. The first trigger actually was the end of last week, last Friday, May 15th. Every month we put out from the Comptroller's office our cash report. And that cash report, no surprise, showed that our tax receipts are down. We're down over 68% from where we were a year ago, down some $7.9 billion. So that easily meets the trigger point of where the governor now can come up with a plan to make adjustments. The financial plan did not spell out where cuts would be, but did identify $1.6 billion in possible cuts to state agencies, $8.2 billion in cuts to local assistance. Local assistance would be school aid to localities as well. There was some concern that as soon as that cash report came out, the cuts would be proposed, and then there'd be that 10-day window for the legislature to take an action. The governor's indicated because of some of the discussion going on in Washington, he's holding off pending to see what may happen there. But you know, there's a real challenge that you could be seeing cuts that will impact at the local level at a time that we are really focusing on how we reopen. In addition to cuts, the budget also gave expanded authority for the state to borrow for cash flow. Again, through the division of the budget, the governor was authorized another over $11 billion in borrowing authority, putting aside our usual limits on debt that we have, again, in the context of an emergency situation. The financial plan identifies about $4.5 billion of possible borrowing to help us with our cash flow. You know, I mean, from my point of view, what we certainly need to understand is that if there are going to be cuts that have implications in terms of impact on local aid to school districts, to municipalities, to healthcare, the sooner we know that, the better. We also have to recognize that the budget challenges we're facing at the state level are not a 1 quarter or even 1 year challenge. You know, the out-year budget gaps are certainly projected to have grown exponentially. So clearly this is going to be an issue with us, you know, for the foreseeable future. We need to keep that in mind. I think we always have to keep in mind as well that a big portion of the state budget doesn't go to state agencies. It goes back to the communities in money for hospitals and healthcare providers, in money for school districts, in money for counties, cities, towns, villages, and local governments. So really the issue is if the state has to balance our budget, because we can't make money, we're not the federal government, and if we balance it by in effect transferring the problem to the local level, certainly our officials at the local level are dealing with a lot on the front line. It doesn't make the situation any better, which is why the focus, I think, is appropriate to say to Washington, we do need more help. You know, without getting into the back and forth that's going on right now, at least they're discussing it, and I think that that's very, very good. The shortfalls that New York is facing, and it's not just New York. You know, New York obviously has been hit the hardest, but virtually every state is having a revenue shortfall, as are localities, because of the pandemic and the impact of that. You know, the economy's on hold, so people aren't spending money. People aren't working. You know, for various reasons, the tax revenue is way, way off. And we look forward to the economy opening up again and the revenues flowing again. But the shortfalls are not a consequence of mismanagement or poor planning. It's a consequence of the pandemic. And so certainly, from my perspective, while we appreciate what our federal legislators and the White House have delivered thus far, we really do need more help in the form of unrestricted aid to the state, so the state doesn't impose cuts on the local levels. But even if the state budget holds together and the commitments to our school district and localities are maintained, we certainly see the revenue shortfall at the local level. And so we do need help directly for our municipalities as well. So I've certainly been adding my voice to what Governor Cuomo has been identifying and so many others. And I have to say that the feedback that I hear from the New York delegation, Republican and Democrat, bipartisan basis, is an understanding that we do need more help from Washington. The National Governors Association has requested $500 billion. Governor Cuomo has looked for $61 billion. The bill at the House passed last week would give New York, I think, close to $67 billion. So my hope is that there will be serious negotiations. Fortunately, the earlier discussions of the solution being states going bankrupt. That seems to be off the table. States can't go bankrupt anyway. You know, we're sovereigns, and you know it's not possible for that to happen. And that really isn't a solution. And you know, I do think the point that New York is consistently a net giver to Washington in terms of tax revenue, it should be appreciated that in a time of crisis. And again, we appreciate what's been done already, but more help is needed. And it's not just New York; it's every other state as well. Let me just mention a couple of other items and get to your questions. I mentioned the state pension fund earlier. I think as many of you know, I serve as trustee for our state pension fund with the third largest public pension plan in the country. 1.1 million New Yorkers depend on the health and strength of that fund. We're very proud of the fact that we are among the best funded state pensions in the country going into this tough time. We were number 4 out of the 50 states at 96% funded, one of only 8 states over 90% funded. Needless to say, you know, like all investors, we took a hit with what's been going on with the markets tanking the way they did. We began March with a nice double-digit positive return, and looking forward to a very good year and hoping we could reduce the contribution rate to our government employers. And just again, the devastation of the last 2 weeks of March, well, we did end up with a negative. You know, that March 31st number is when we value the fund. Timing, you know, wasn't on our side this year, but because that number is an audited number, you know, we haven't gotten the final data points in, particularly with our real estate and our private equity investments. So we do know it's going to be a negative. I guess in terms of context, the good news is, if there is good news, compared to 10 years ago when the Great Recession hit, some of you may recall we lost 26% value of our fund just in 1 year. So for this go around, I know we don't have a double-digit loss. It'll be a single-digit loss. What it is, I don't know yet. It will no doubt have an impact on increasing the contribution rate that we will charge to our government employers, local governments and state government for the 2021-2022 bill. And again, it shows how there will be an ongoing impact in terms of this. But you know, we have positioned the fund more conservatively. We had lowered our assumed rate of return several times over the past few years. We're one of the few funds with an assumed rate of return below 7% at 6.8%. So, you know, we still have confidence that for the long term, we'll be able to weather the storm just as we've done it before. And so for those of you who may have family members who are part of the system, the fund is safe, it is secure, and we're confident that we will weather the storm. So we have no problem paying out the pension benefits, and we've also been working very hard to make sure people know how to make sure their information is updated in our system. We were able to work with the governor's office and have an executive order to waive the 15-day waiting period for the employees' retirement system. I won't get into the weeds on that, but the long and the short is that we had cases of members in the system who were working on the front lines dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, got sick, and in some cases on ventilators and near death. And because of that waiting period that applies, their families might have missed out on the opportunity to receive a survivor's pension benefit. And the governor did sign the executive order where we could waive that. And unfortunately, we have had a few cases across the state where families have had to exercise that option, and certainly it's provided more financial security in those unfortunate situations where some of our members have gotten sick and have passed away, and that window would have not made it possible for their survivors to get those benefits. So we're up and running. I'm here in Albany, where I spend most of my time, but like many of your organizations, most of our team are working remotely, and fortunately we're a pretty tech savvy organization, so we've certainly been keeping up with our activities. The bills are being paid, the contracts are being approved, payments are going out the door, the pension checks, as I said, are being paid. Through the beginning of this pandemic crisis, we've approved about $721 million in emergency payments for equipment like ventilators, for personal protective equipment. Again, in response to the emergency, our usual review of contracts before we do a payment was waived. In the face of the crisis, we generally don't like when our review authority is waived. We understand what's going on, but we have been working with the governor's office to expedite payments when it's been urgently needed. We're also working with the governor's office on the various issues related to the unemployment benefits. The system was overwhelmed, and it's not our lead responsibility is Department of Labor, and they've certainly been working to upgrade that process. We're the back end of it though, but we've worked with the governor's office so that when we get the information from Department of Labor, we're turning around those payments as quickly as possible, and certainly ensuring no delay on our end. We also, and I think we have some slides that we're going to put up, if I'm not mistaken, Todd. With our pension fund, the way that we're able to pay pension benefits, we get some employee contributions and then the employer contributions. But the biggest part of how we pay for pension benefits is investment return. Over the past 20 years, over 70% of how we pay the pension benefits is from investment return. So we have a very diversified portfolio. One part of our portfolio has always been an investment relationship with the New York Business Development Corporation. And NYBDC, which some of you may be familiar with, they just recently changed their name to Pursuit Lending. It's the old NYBDC. We have had, through them, a financing of a small business lending program, and working with Pat McCrell and the team there, money we had already allocated to them, Pursuit has designated $50 million of that for taking advantage of some of the pluses in the federal PPP. Been some questions with the earlier rollout. They cleaned up a lot of that, but Pursuit Lending, which is a long-term relationship with the pension fund back to 1987, we are pleased to be part of what is making available to small businesses in New York another opportunity for a loan to get through this time of crisis. So a little different from the PPP programs. With Pursuit Lending, there's no minimum for the loan, but the maximum is $350,000. So it really is geared to small businesses. It is only available to New York-based businesses. There is a goal, is always of 25% to women and minority-owned firms, and they always meet and exceed that. Under this program, 501c3 nonprofits are also available for the loan. So I want to emphasize, this is part of an investment relationship we've had with Pursuit, formerly NYBDC, for many years. And if we have the slide up there, for those of you who, especially if you had a frustration with the federal program, I just want to point you to the Pursuit website, which is pursuitlending.com, Pursuit Lending spelled out just the way you would imagine, .com, and the phone number is 866-466-9232. So it's 866-466-9232. Again, makes money for the pension fund. These are safe. The loans are guaranteed. Even if a loan would qualify under the forgiveness provisions, our relationship with Pursuit Lending is the return that we're expected to have is guaranteed. So there's no loss, no risk to the fund. We treat the return from this program as like a fixed income return, because the return is basically treasuries plus a very modest premium. So again, a successful program that helps with the investments for our pension fund, but also I think helps New York small businesses at a time of great challenge. I also want to mention, again, I'm not sure if the slides are going up or not, but our website, because we have a lot of information available that we encourage you to go to the website, whatever your search engine is, put in New York State Comptroller. But if you can see the slide, it's osc.state.ny.us, and you get the screen, and there are various parts of the website that you can go to. We have developed, in response to the pandemic, a financial survival toolkit for New Yorkers. So again, I'm not sure if the slide is up, but if it is, the website is up there. And you'll see when you go to the main screen on our website, right there on the top right is the COVID-19 financial toolkit. Click on that, and certainly the kind of resources that can help small businesses, that can help people who are state employees or local government employees, part of the pension system. There are many useful subsets to that financial toolkit that you can click on. We've been encouraging members of the pension system to make sure their beneficiary information is up to date. We've been encouraging state employees and retirees, if you're not already on direct deposit, please do so. It's a more efficient way for you to get your paycheck or your pension benefit check. without having to get the paper and go to the bank, especially as some people, are concerned about going outside, with everything going on. So again, I'm not sure if you can see the slides, but there are the toolkit and the website information up there. Our main number, if any of you have any questions as a follow-up to our discussion today, is 518-474-4040. I'm here, our team is here, and we certainly will look forward to answering any questions you have. The last item that I want to mention, it's always the fun part of what we do. So during times where people are struggling and money is in short supply, we always like to remind people of our unclaimed funds work, where we return lost money. Could be an old account that went dormant because you moved and your contact information wasn't kept up to date. It could be a health insurance check that wasn't cashed, or it could be an old financial account of some kind that for whatever reason was declared dormant and turned over to the state. We have accounts valued at about $16 billion of unclaimed funds, so we always try to get the word out there to New Yorkers about searching online. Again, we have a slide, osc.state.ny.us, click on unclaimed funds, and we have an 800 number Monday through Friday, business hours, 1-800-221-9311. You can easily search online, and if you're in the system, often get a check within a matter of days. Chautauqua County has over 30,000 accounts of unclaimed funds valued at over $13 million. So again, whether you're a business, an individual, an organization, if you have friends or family, let them know about it. If you have deceased relatives, put their names in. You can search online. When you can't sleep tonight at 2 in the morning, go to our website. And Todd Tronham, just to show that we're not making it up, believe it or not, we found $370.50 for you in unclaimed funds. So Tom Carpenter is going to get you the paperwork, and you are living proof that there are folks in Chautauqua County who we owe money to. And during these tough times, we want to get that money back to you. So it is a challenging time. We're certainly doing what we can to help the state navigate. And, I'm always an optimist. I have no reason not to be an optimist as we go through this time. I know, having lived through 9/11 and living downstate through that, and having gone through the beginning of the Great Recession and being controller, when we lost 26% value of our pension fund just in that 1 year, I've certainly lived through, as many of you have, unexpectedly challenging times. Now, this is a different kind of challenge, feels different in many ways, and there's a public health dimension that we haven't experienced before. But I have a lot of confidence in our strength as New Yorkers, our strength as Americans. What it requires us to do is talk to each other a bit more and come up with shared solutions on how we can get through this to benefit all. So as your region now starts that phase 1 of reopening, I'm hoping that it'll be sooner than later better news for all of your businesses, for all of your organizations. The real solution, we need that federal help to be a bridge as we get through this tough time. The real solution is getting the economy moving again, people working again, people having confidence to spend money again. So thanks for your patience, and Todd, let me end it there and open up to questions.
Tom, we had an issue with the slides, so if you want to send those to us, we'd be happy to distribute those widely to this group. And okay. I got to say, it's been a great day. It's been a great day. We're reopening the economy, and I just found out I've got $370 I can claim, and I guarantee we will inject that into our local economy and help support some of our small businesses here. That's found money, so thank you. Also want to welcome Senator Borrello and Assemblyman Goodell. They have joined us here as well today, as well as thank them for their leadership and helping with guidance towards reopening our economy. So
and Todd, I just want to say your Senate and your Assembly members are very fierce advocates for your part of the state. They are not shy about speaking out and explaining what Chautauqua County and Western New York needs. I can't say that they always get listened to, but I do know they speak out, and I think they represent your community very, very well, and they're very dedicated public officials.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. Thank you. So digging into some questions here, with New York seeing a significant decline in revenue how will the state be able to continue to make payments, including unemployment insurance, which has grown, I think you mentioned, to $7.4 billion as of today?
Yeah, and again, some of that is related to the federal help that we're getting. And again, keep in mind, what I said earlier, we have cash on hand, first of all, so it's not like we don't have some money in the bank. We have started to see the federal money flow to us, and we're expecting there to be more. So keep those pieces in mind. In terms of how we manage forward, as I said, the state budget basically provided two other tools for the state to use to keep in the black and keep in balance. One is what people fear, and that is budget cuts. And one would hope that would be a last resort, because budget cuts could mean less money to our schools, to our local governments who are on the front lines. In the extreme, it could mean layoffs, again, at a time where many people are relying on essential government services. So, the other piece is the borrowing option. So, as I mentioned, the budget provided for over $11 billion in additional opportunity for the state to borrow, again, as a bridge to better times coming. And at this point, the financial plan envisions about $4.5 billion of that to be utilized. So, I think the expectation is that if we get some more support from Washington, that option of the more extreme budget cuts that the governor outlined as a possibility could be avoided. There's another option out there. I personally don't think it's one that makes a whole lot of sense right now when we're in a crisis, but I'd be less than, in the interest of full disclosure, just so you know what the discussion is that goes on. There are some members of the legislature that are calling for tax increases as a way to plug some of the holes. I don't sense there's a strong appetite for that, but that is another piece. So it's cuts, it's borrowing, it's more help from Washington, it's tax increases. And at this point, everything really is looking at the data points as quickly as we could get them. The governor does have the authority now, based on the report we put out on Friday, to exercise the cut of the borrowing. And right now, he's indicated, let's see what Washington comes up with. So I think we're kind of in a holding pattern right now, but we'll certainly be sharing information as we learn more.
And I'll just state, I think, looking at revenue enhancers like tax increases are going to make it even more difficult as we reopen the economy and these businesses try to get back on their feet. I know you're well aware of that point, but hopefully you can help carry that message back to others. Our cities came into this situation not in the best financial condition to begin with, and obviously the impact of us, declining sales tax revenue and other sorts of revenues are going to make it very difficult for our two cities. As you're aware, too, Dunkirk had the situation within our NRG plant, which was their largest taxpayer, and we're not successful in getting that repowered. City of Jamestown is at its constitutional taxing limit.
Yeah.
Do you foresee any other options cities or municipalities may have as we emerge out of this to do, significant restructuring? I know there's, the control board option and those types of things, but do you see any other ways in which these municipalities are going to be able to deal with these issues?
The control board option is one that, frankly, there hasn't been a strong appetite for engaging in. There are some control boards that exist now for Nassau County, for Buffalo, for Erie, Troy. Technically, New York City, by the way, still has a control board, although it's not been active. Though some people have said, will we reach a state where New York City's control board will be reactivated? I don't think we're at that point. So I think in terms of control board option, I don't think so. I think, down the road, could deficit financing be an option, as we've seen, for some of the counties and some of the cities like, Lockport had that a couple of years ago, Rockland County. And when those kinds of mechanisms have been enacted by the legislature, it has gone along with not a control board, but with enhanced oversight from the state controller's office, including basically a requirement that we review their budgets and make recommendations that are in effect binding, on the city or the county, depending on the situation. The Federal Reserve has provided through the municipal lending facility a borrowing option, again, meant to be a bridge to a better day, not necessarily a long-term solution. It's part of why, as I said earlier, I think it's important whenever we advocate for more support for Washington, it's important that we make clear it is not just for state government. We do need more money directly, for our cities, for our counties, for our municipalities. So, I think the first answer, really is what will the package look like from Washington, and how much of that will be directed to our cities and to our localities. If there is still a gap after that, then perhaps some of those other options in terms of deficit financing may have to be looked at. But, I think there's always a concern at the local level to not cede, control over a budget. We did recently approve the first round of AIM reimbursements. The AIM formula was changed last year. My own personal view, I always am careful not to tell the legislature and the governor how to spend money, because my job is to make sure they're spending it as they intend. But one area where I think we could have done a better job over a number of years would have been to increase basically the revenue sharing through the AIM program. So AIM is certainly something that has helped cities, and as I said, the first round we were able to start to have that money flow. But I think it's all really contingent on how much money comes from Washington and whether or not any state budget cuts are adopted that affect the city, Dunkirk and Jamestown and the other cities. So again, we need a little more information.
Do you think
and Todd, as just mentioned, I'm told the slides are now with Sheila Webster, so hopefully the slides can at some point.
Okay. We'll get those out. Given the economic devastation this is going to cause and ultimately fall on the shoulders of our municipalities, counties, and potentially the taxpayers, do you think this is a call to action for some more serious conversations around dissolution of some of the multiple layers of government, more shared services, as well as possibly school consolidations?
I think the short answer is yes. I think the longer answer from my perspective is that I think the most appropriate focus of that discussion is on shared services, because I think when you get into questions of dissolution, consolidation, especially of school districts, they often become non-starters because, very often, even if the numbers might suggest a benefit, in many cases, I don't want to say all, people do not want to give up their local control, their local identity. So I certainly think any community that wants to consider dissolving a level of government or doing an outright, consolidation or merger, they certainly should consider it. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the experience in most cases is that an awful lot of time is spent talking about it, and then at the end of the day, it's just not something that enough of the public really want. But any opportunity to accelerate shared services, particularly with regard to joint opportunities for more collaborative purchasing, collaborative bidding, again, as technology advances, a consolidation of back office operations, I do think there are ways to save money without necessarily getting into the political minefield. And I don't mean Republican Democrat, I mean local politics minefield of dissolving a village or a town or merging school districts. So yes, I think any time you have a crisis like this, you shouldn't waste it. It should be an opportunity to try to be smarter. And there are opportunities through the Department of State, with some grant opportunities to, look at shared services. We've got some information, in our wheelhouse in terms of successful models that have worked. And obviously, we always provide technical guidance and assistance from our local government division and our legal division about how to go about doing it. So if there are any communities in your county or the counties in Western New York that want to pursue this, be in touch with Tom Carpenter, and he'll certainly put you in touch with the folks in our office who have done work on shared services and on consolidation issues, and try to be helpful.
Great, thank you. What are the impacts of the state's financial plan on entities like Jamestown Community College and State University of New York at Fredonia? You spoke a little bit to some of the impacts on the public sector, school sector of our economy, but what are the implications for our two post-secondary institutions?
Well, I think one piece of good news, what's helped with K through 12 has been the $1 billion that came from Washington, and that was anticipated in the state budget. And as I mentioned, $921 million also has been designated by Washington for higher education, including public higher education. That money, I don't believe has flowed yet. So, from a financial end, again, depending on how the budget holds together, there might be limited direct impact. In terms of the bigger issues, I think that they're confronting right now is their reopening. Do they have summer programs? Do they reopen in the fall? If they do, what does it look like? Can you have a large lecture hall, on a SUNY campus anymore? And I think those are the questions that SUNY certainly they're grappling with. They're a quasi-independent entity, so the chancellor and her team I know are looking at this. You have the students now, as they've been closing out this semester, working remotely. There's been a fair amount of experimentation with distance learning even prior to this crisis, and it just as in your earlier question about looking at other issues of consolidation and shared services, I think this crisis is really ramping up the discussion about distance learning and how that gets implemented in higher education, both public and private. The chancellor, she had already been really making clear that she wanted to move SUNY very aggressively in this direction prior to the pandemic hitting. So I think what they're grappling with now, and I haven't gotten any update that they've come to any conclusion, is the question of what a reopening looks like. So hopefully from a financial end, that additional money from Washington, and again, if the state budget could hold together as best as possible, hopefully you won't see any direct impact, in terms of an additional financial hit. But, in terms of what the campuses will look like, what classes will look like, how learning will be conducted, I think that's the real challenge that the SUNY leadership is engaged in right now.
Let's talk about Medicaid real quick. Medicaid costs remain a significant portion of our county budget expenses, and with that, a major driver of our property taxes. Do you foresee additional Medicaid reform coming anytime in the near future?
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, the federal government has increased the reimbursement in the short run. So again, that's going to help in terms of dealing with the increased costs that we've been going through. And as you know, the governor at the beginning of the budget process reestablished the Medicaid redesign team, headed by Michael Dowling, the head of Northwell, and Dennis Rivera, the former head of 1199 SEIU. And that Medicaid redesign team came up with some, very specific recommendations in terms of how to make the system more efficient. There were a lot of concerns about some of the proposals that seem to transfer some of the costs to the local level. The challenge right now is that the additional help from Washington was tied to no diminution of any state program. So I think, at least for now, the discussion of changes in the program in terms of cost savings is probably on hold until we get through, the pandemic. But given the fact that Medicaid is such a big cost driver, I do think that that discussion about the Medicaid redesign team's first round of recommendations, and my guess is they'll probably be in business again for another round of discussions and recommendations. I do think that will continue. Again, just like with my earlier discussion about impacts of cuts at the state level, I do think the concern that county executives raised was an appropriate one, that making the system more efficient should not just be a question of transferring the cost to another level of government. The state, a number of years ago, capped the growth at the local level. And while that hasn't relieved the burden, it certainly, for a number of years has shifted, more of the cost to the state level. So, how we deal with the Medicaid question, I think will probably be in the context of a broader discussion about the public health system in New York. As you know, we learned in some ways, the hard way, that while we have public health concerns, we have a Department of Health at the state level, and we have, county departments of health, we really don't have a unified system. And in fact, in response to the pandemic, we had to see a lot of learning as we do, coordination in terms of hospital resources, medical providers, public hospitals, private hospitals, how can they mesh together? That was a big issue, certainly downstate, with all the number of cases down here. And look, you've been following the papers. I mean, the nursing homes have been a real issue. And many of the nursing homes have a significant percentage of Medicaid patients and residents. And so, there's been a lot of concerns about adequacy of staffing. I mean, even putting aside the questions of regulations and, some of the issues with, some of the earlier Department of Health guidance. The other question that a lot of people raised is, well, what kind of staffing levels, have we been providing, in our nursing homes? Well, some of that's driven by what the reimbursements are from Medicaid. So, not to answer your question by throwing a lot of other questions on the table, but, that's one of the challenges. This is not an easy discussion. There's a lot of complexity to it. And my guess is, besides the short-term interest in saving money, there's going to be a longer-term discussion about how we, in fact, rationalize the healthcare system in our state to ensure that we're better prepared, in terms of a public health response.
Okay, thank you. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm with you.
Okay, we've received a couple on the chat line here. Let's see, there's a question related to, has there been any consideration related to the pension plan and changing it from a pension to a generous 401k option, such as a 8% or 10% match?
Well, I can answer that by saying I hope not. I'm a strong believer and supporter of a defined benefit pension. I think that's the only way to really ensure retirement security. Again, New York, unlike so many other states, be it Illinois or Kentucky or Jersey or Connecticut or Pennsylvania, we are always in the top 5 or 6 state pension plans in terms of how well funded we are. So, I think for New York, the reality is, we've managed it well. It provides retirement security to a lot of New Yorkers. I'm very proud to say that 80% of our retirees continue to live in New York State. So when you consider that we're now paying out over $1 billion a month in retirement benefits, so $12 billion a year, 80% of that $12 billion stays right here in New York. People being able to stay in New York, which is a higher cost state, and spending their money, paying their taxes. It's an important part of our local economies. I think especially in some of the communities and counties that have been losing population, very often it's the folks that worked in the school district or for the county or the village or worked in the prison, worked for the state. They're the ones that when they retire, they still stay in the community and contribute back. So I'm still a strong believer in the purpose of a pension, which is retirement security. And I just don't think a 401k provides it, no matter how generous it is. And, the lesson of, what we're going through right now is similar to the lesson of 10 years ago. It's great to say, some people argue, 401k, you're in control of your money, you can decide where to put it. Well, if you were about to retire, on April 1st of 2020, your 401k probably didn't look too much like you thought it was going to look. Same thing was the experience 10 years ago. So, the vulnerability with a 401k is that if your timing, no matter how smart you are or what kind of financial guidance you have, if you hit your timing wrong because of a market crash, you're really left without retirement security. And sometimes people say, well, that's all well and good, but the private sector, they don't provide this anymore. Well, you know what? Maybe that was a mistake. I don't think the answer to the retirement security we have in our country is to have even fewer people with pensions. And I do argue it from the point of view that in New York, we have a well-funded plan and a well-managed plan. So I personally don't support abandoning that and moving to a 401k.
Okay, can you comment on when the New York State Budget Office will stop holding federally allocated funds to local areas for which New York State is simply a pass-through? For example, funding for our workforce investment boards who are on the front line trying to help people through their unemployment situation and get back to work. I know there's been some holdup with some federal dollars that were supposed to come through for childcare, which is really important on reopen because our employers need to have access to that childcare.
I haven't heard of any across the board policy in terms of holding up any of those pass-through payments. So a couple things I'd say. Number one, short of what we talked about earlier in terms of cuts or borrowing or taxes, as any of you can appreciate running an organization, managing the timing of your payments, and handling cash flow is another option. So, we know from past go-arounds that there are times where decisions are made in terms of slowing up reimbursements or payments. I've not seen that per se happening now. I would say if any of you have an interest in a particular program, be it federal or perhaps you're a vendor with the state and you have a payment that's owed to you that seems to be held up, be in touch with our office, be in touch with Tom Carpenter or call me, or Todd knows how to find us. We're the last part of the process, right? So the state agency has to send us, the payment that we then, cut the check for. But if there is a particular item that seems to be held up, we could at the very least track it back and see where it's at in the process.
Very good. Tom, we're up close now to an hour. Would you like to make some closing comments?
I guess I just reiterate what I said earlier. That is my sense of optimism, despite the challenges that we're going through. Certainly appreciate what all of you are doing individually. I'm sure when you're out and about, you're wearing your masks and you're taking the appropriate precautions. And for what you do as an organization in terms of the chamber and your business colleagues. I mean, obviously, if we're going to come out of this, getting your input and your guidance about how you can get back to providing your services in a safe way and responsive to your customers and to be economically viable for you, that's going to be key. So, we'll continue to do our end of the bargain with the work that we're charged with. But, if you have any thoughts you want to share with us, we don't decide how the money is spent. That's up to the legislature and the governor. We don't set policy for the state, but we do have a voice in some of this stuff, and we try to use that voice in a constructive way. So, Todd, feel free to be in touch with me. All of you consider Tom Carpenter a local resource, and congratulations to your region on entering phase 1 tomorrow. I live on Long Island. We're nowhere near phase 1. So, God bless that you're at that point, and I just wish you all safety, good health, and prosperity on top of all that as well.
Tom, thank you for your time today. This was very informative. We wish you the best. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you as well to your staff for helping us put this together today. This is very helpful. For those who are still with us, I just want to remind you that our next session will be next Tuesday instead of Monday because of the holiday. So next Tuesday at 3:30, please watch your email for an invite. We'll be talking about reopening and reopening plans and resources available to your business as we start to reopen the economy. Again, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay well, and have a great week. Take care.